So, welcome to our first brain talk. I want to talk first about safety. So, we're kind of entering this portal of transformation. We're making changes. There's a lot of neuroplasticity happening. And usually that doesn't really even take place unless a person actually feels safe first. So, why does change feel so hard and what we're going to be doing this month? First thing is that this is not really a performance space. It is meant to be a nervous system container that has multiple people in it. I'm facilitating and leading that space, but really, as you can see from the chat, it's a community connected experience of people sharing their limitations so that you can see what other people are dealing with. It makes it easier for you to share your own limitations and doubts. And then also what I noticed this week so far, just in the small amount of days that we've been participating in the group chat, is that all it takes is one person to give permission to a whole other group of people to like dream bigger, to be lofty with their goals. Like I pointed it out in the images, I saw a lot of like bags of coins and money and things that if I was just like, okay, like let's just make vision boards, a lot of people would probably be afraid to put things like that out there. But when one person leads the way, it's like, oh, okay, well, if they want $1 million, then there's really like no other goal that's going to seem too small or too big or crazy that. So we're working with the theme of limitation and doubt, and limitation and doubt are not proof that you're broken. They're proof that your brain is actually working perfectly and doing its job, which is to try to keep you safe. So that's why change feels so hard because the brain is literally designed to focus on the things that don't work really hard as a way to keep you protected and safe. And so we can sort of de-shame that process that we all go through of like, oh, well, why am I so hard on myself? Or why do I have all these thoughts of doubt? It's really just wired into the human experience. And that's why our species has this strong survival instinct. But when we apply it to modern life, it doesn't really balance out too quickly. So we're just talking about orientation and safety because change doesn't happen through forcing it. You might think of, Lisa gives this example a lot, but when a person's like really worked up and you just say to them, why don't you just relax? Like, what does that make you want to do that makes you want to punch them in the face? There's this like natural resistance to being forced into being happy. It has to come from an authentic place. So change happens naturally when the nervous system actually feels safe enough to go through an update. So I briefly just mentioned modern stress. This is important to understand when you're thinking about the nervous system that we're approaching and experiencing the nervous system from a modern perspective. So it's things like emails and deadlines and conflict with your partner and uncertainty of jobs and being perceived by people on social media or not having enough money or having too much money or having to pay taxes or feeling left out or behind or lots of these social stressors are things that what most people are stressed out by today. But our nervous system evolved to protect us from things like physical threats and predators and danger and survival stuff like that in the wild. So we're responding to ancient stressors, or the nervous system, the body is responding to survival-based things for things that are in modern day life really not survival based. Like if, for example, if you don't answer an email, no one's going to die. If you don't post the video on social media, no one's going to die. So there's this like sort of space between the ancient nervous system and the way that it responds to danger and living in a modern life. And so the body reacts as if these modern stressors are literally life or death things. This is why sometimes you're like, man, am I overreacting? Or why is this like such a big response for me? It's because the nervous system doesn't know the difference between that email that you just got that set you off or literally being chased by a bear. It's the same feelings in the body. You still have the tight chest, the racing thoughts, the maybe shutdown or irritability or overthinking. And then that can turn into numbing, scrolling, freezing. So it's the same feeling. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference. And that doesn't make you weak. It actually just means that your nervous system is doing its thing automatically, which is exactly what we want it to do. And so then we're focusing on the good aspect of this is that when we know how to train the nervous system, we can retrain it, almost like reverse engineering it. So the directions that your nervous system moves, a lot of you probably already know this. It's never bad to review it. You can think of it like a four-directional system. So the fight response and the flight response, those are both sympathetic arousal states. Fight or flight, whether you're going to run away or fight back, that can show up as irritability, like pushing or controlling. These things have a quality of heat, which is aroused, like you get worked up. And if you get really worked up, you might run away, which could also have that feeling of anxiety or overdoing or even escaping. And then freeze is a parasympathetic state. The last two are parasympathetic. So when we think, a lot of people actually think, and I hear this a lot in yoga class, but they're like, okay, we're gonna in a yin state or in a meditation, now we're gonna like let the body go into a parasympathetic state. That alone, I guess, as a statement is not necessarily untrue, but with the caveat that a freeze or collapse state is also technically considered parasympathetic. And so there will be at least half the room of people that their nervous systems don't go sympathetic. They don't fight or flight naturally. They shut down or collapse. And so for those people, we don't want them to go deeper into a parasympathetic state because they're already there. So just having that understanding that when you're one of those people that could be like just naturally kind of shut down, like I think of myself, I'm a parasympathetic based person. So like in a yoga class, for example, I'm well known for me to fall asleep in Shavasana and stay there. That is a parasympathetic quality of like you can sort of just check out. I'm not necessarily numbing when I'm sleeping, but it is this ease that my nervous system has, whereas a sympathetic person would probably never fall asleep in a yoga class. And then the good homeostasis, this is the parasympathetic that we're talking about called rest and digest. That's the home base. It's like a return point where your body feels more balanced, like when you're able to connect with people and digest your food and everything's A1 and all good. So we've got three directions of stress and then one direction of balance, four directions in total. So homeostasis, I like to think of it like home base. And one also important thing that I like to note a lot is that homeostasis is not a goal. It's not a place that we're like, okay, I'm going to try to get there and stay there forever. It's a place that we orient ourselves towards. So it's a place that you can come back to when things get out of balance. But life itself, to get up off the couch today and go to the bathroom or to go to fix yourself a meal or go to work. All of those things require sympathetic activation or some level of arousal in your nervous system. So we don't want to get into the language of thinking, oh, I want to be like in homeostasis all the time or always in a parasympathetic state of rest. You actually don't because you do need to mobilize and be able to use your nervous system. What we want is for it to be adaptable. So the goal isn't to be perfect, it's to be flexible. And we think of this in terms of physical practice a lot. We're like, okay, I'm going to a yoga class, so the more I practice, the more flexible and strong I'll become. And that flexibility is something that if you've practiced flexibility, you know this. It's not something that just happens overnight. It happens with practice. So if you never stretch, you don't become more flexible. And it's the same thing with neuroplasticity. If you never practice, you'll never make a change. But you do have this ability to make a change. So this month is really just about building that flexibility. You can think of the analogy of like a physical practice. And so we're not doing a physical practice, obviously, to do neuroplasticity. It's a top-down modality, meaning a, like a brain signaling to body meditation modality. But you can imagine that you're practicing that same level of flexibility just with the nervous system instead. And so this is really important when you're thinking about writing a new story, working on limiting beliefs or doubts that you might have about your life or yourself or other people, even. Because when we're on the verge of telling a new story, those mechanisms of protection will all kick in. So that's why we're spending the first week just like learning about what we're doing, getting safe in the container, building relationship and rapport so that people feel like they can share. And so that is what's going to set you up. It's a foundation for when you go to make a new story and a thought comes up, you feel safe enough to share it. And then you sort of lean into the group supports you through it. And then for the first time ever, you're like, oh, actually, I moved through that limitation and doubt. I took action. I didn't die. And now your brain knows it's safe to do that again. And then you repeat that process until that pattern then becomes automatic. So you can make change. It is not, I like to say it's easy. It's simple. It's not easy. It feels like death sometimes when you're going against your programming, but that's why we have the beauty of neurosculpting because it's a very simple process that once you figure it out, and I'll teach you the steps so you can do it on yourself. You won't need me necessarily by the end of the 30 days. You can do this on yourself. You don't need a facilitator to do it. That's why I love it so much because it really does hit my need for autonomy to be like, okay, well, once I know the protocol, I don't need anyone else to do it for me. The only thing that I need now is my commitment to show up for myself, to be willing to repeat something enough times that it becomes automatic and something I'm good at. So the limbic system versus the prefrontal cortex, this is a huge key concept in neurosculpting. It's one of the most helpful brain concepts that you can think about when it comes specifically to limitation and doubt. So when you're super stressed out, your limbic brain, which is the emotional part of the brain, gets super loud. So it's like an internal alarm system. And you know this if you have an alarm system at home or at work, you know how they work. If the key is set and it's like, okay, the alarm's on, and then someone breaks in, what happens? The alarms go off and shit goes haywire and no one can hear anything. And it's like, whoa. So it's a good analogy of how the limbic brain works. Once it gets activated, it's like the alarm is going off and there's really only one way of turning it down. So the prefrontal cortex and the limbic brain have this relationship. And so the prefrontal is the part of your brain that handles your clarity, your ability to make new decisions or better decisions, to regulate your emotions, to have perspective. And this part of the brain will get really quiet when the limbic brain is active because they have something that's called a inverse relationship. So having an inverse relationship means that when limbic is on, prefrontal is down. And when prefrontal is on, limbic is down. And so it's kind of like one of those reverse switches that if one dial is up really high, then the other just turns itself down and vice versa. They can't both be on max all the time. So when you're feeling overwhelmed, this is why you can't really logic your way out or think your way out of a problem because the part of your brain that you need to make a decision is actually off. So you kind of, you're like, why do I feel so stupid right now? Or why can't I figure this out? Because your brain resources literally aren't available to you. And so this is why I'm so passionate about teaching the neuroscience behind it. Because once you know that, you're like, okay, well, first of all, I can stop shaming myself for responding that way because there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just so stressed out and overwhelmed, and my nervous system is taxed that I don't have any prefrontal capacity, which is going to make it almost impossible for me to make good decisions. Okay, if I know that about myself, I can certainly be way more gentle and compassionate the next time it happens to me. So you can't make your best plan when you're all stressed out. You can't be your highest self. You can't be creative. You can't connect with people. And that's because your brain literally is perceiving that you're dying and it's going into protection mode, which is exactly what you want it to do. We don't want to turn off those automatic alarm systems. They actually do keep you safe. So the first move isn't to fix your mindset. The first move is to first quiet the alarm enough for the thinking brain to come back online. So we have to like put in that key code for the alarm system, disarm it first. And so that's what we're going to be doing in the meditation this week is learning how to just first disarm the nervous system toward change at all. And so neuroplasticity is the whole reason that this all works. And neuroplasticity is super simple. It just means that your brain is capable of making change. It has that capacity. It's plastic, it's moldable. It's not something that's static and fixed. But the only thing is that we can't make neuroplastic change through willpower. It actually just happens through repetition, experience, and being safe enough for the program or the new pattern to click itself in. So really, when you think about it, it's just repetition and experience, repetition and experience, repetition and experience, which for anything that you've become proficient and good at in your life, you know that the first time you did it, the first 5 times, maybe even the first 10 times that you did something, you weren't amazing at it. But after 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 repetitions of something, it becomes more natural and easier to do over time. That's because of repetition and experience. And of course, enough safety that you're like, okay, well, at least my nervous system doesn't think that it's going to die. So I'm safe enough to learn this new thing. And so when you practice a new state enough times, say we wanted to practice being a calm, grounded, capable, open person, if we had the enough experience and repetition of that state, then that would become recognizable to your brain and more available to your brain. And so then the old story stops being the only option. So this is where it gets tricky, and I think that there's a lot of ways to relate to this and give it tons of analogies, but anything that you do for the first time is, of course, uncomfortable. You don't know how to do it, you don't know the steps yet. You could just be like, okay, I don't know. Like, how am I supposed to do it? And then that's when the thoughts of limitation and doubt come in because you're like, okay, I have this plan, like I want to open a new business or do a new thing. And then when it comes down to actually taking the action, which would require having probably self-discipline and the qualities that would be required, then you would be like, okay, I don't have that. And then the thoughts of limitation and doubt come up, and all the shame and all the negative stuff would be like, okay, well, I don't know how to do it. It's not easy for me. So and so had it better. We start looking for reasons to prove ourselves right so that we won't have to make any changes at all because it's safer and easier for the brain and the body to stay exactly as it is, especially when we've been in these like states of stress for so long. The nervous system might actually perceive changing that story as a threat itself because it started to identify with being that way. And so the autonomic nervous system is really good at automating things. Once it's locked in, it's like, okay, that's just the way I am. And so to challenge that story can also bring up the resistance of it. So we're trying to install essentially options of other stories that the nervous system could accept if it felt like it was comfortable enough to do that. And then there's, of course, techniques and tools and lots of things we'll do along the way to actually get the nervous system into a receptive, safe place to accept change. So the reason why we're doing this is not for some massive transformation on the first day. We're really just going for a teeny tiny, teeny weeny 0.1% change to start. And then gradually over time, you might feel more comfortable with adding more change to that. But first, we're just starting small, like tiny little bites, just enough to make sure that we feel safe and consistent enough to start creating a new pathway. And when we do this work individually, that number, like if you're assessing yourself and you're like, okay, honestly speaking, how much change do I feel like my nervous system has the capacity for? If you're asking yourself that question personally today, that number might be higher than zero point 0.1, and that's okay. You could be like, fuck, I'm ready for 50% change today. Let's go. And that could be true for you. And if that's where you're at, then meet yourself there and start taking action from that place. But when we're working in a group setting, so not individual, then we have to encompass and experience, like we're including everybody. So I posted this somewhere this week, like no one left behind. We're starting at zero point 0.1 so that anybody, even with a tiny threshold for change, it won't be excluded or left behind. Because I noticed a few comments this week too, people being like, I don't even know where to start. Like, it's not even safe for some people to even start thinking or dreaming up what they might want just because the nervous system is so locked out from change. So most people, and there might even still be people who are 0.1% change is still a threat to their nervous system. That's when we would start to communicate more permission to be like, okay, well, maybe today you're not even making any change. So that's also possible. Maybe you go through this full 30 days and don't make a single change, but this is your nervous system's way of becoming familiar with the way that change even works. So it's kind of like, well, I'll take the course, but I'm not committing to anything. That could also be true. So there's a huge threshold, I guess, of different people's capacity for change. But for the sake of working together in a group and creating a group container, we start with a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of change, and then we work into more change over time. So a simple lens for doubt, there's this model that's called SCARF that we use in neurosculpting. SCARF is not something that Lisa came up with. She borrowed this from a guy named David Rock. And so SCARF is just an acronym that stands for certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness, and status. And so the idea around the SCARF model is that David Rock was teaching that all people basically have these primary needs. It's kind of similar to nonviolent communication in a lot of ways, like a lot of these things that we talk about a lot, at least in the yoga teacher training, overlap because most people are wired for connection and they have the same emotional needs as the next person. And so when these things get triggered, they send us all into states of stress. Like we all have different trigger points, but generally speaking, these five, if you can avoid triggering people and yourself with these five things, then at least you're starting off with the safest approach that you possibly could. So when we consider things like certainty, it's like, okay, well, what's happening? What can I expect? In this container, I provided you with a calendar of the whole month. Then within the first 24 hours, went and made a change on you. Obviously, we need to be able to adapt to life. That's an example of like, oh, I have a specialist eye appointment I can't change. Okay, I'll make one change, but I'm still providing enough certainty that a small change is probably at least adaptable enough that like five or six of you were able to make that change in the last 24 hours. And instead of going to class yesterday, came to class today. But for the most part, that calendar and having a visual plan of the month, if you know what time and what days things are at, that is a level of certainty to your nervous system. We practice this a lot at Kuma as well, just by giving people permission to like leave the room if they need to, or even naming the pose, like, okay, we're going into this pose next. Giving people some amount of certainty, even yourself, is a great place to start. And then autonomy, this is a really big one for a lot of people that have experienced trauma specifically. When you experience trauma, usually it's because a choice was made for you or taken away from you, and you lost a sense of agency or autonomy. And so when you give yourself these small little increments of opportunities to have choice again, that can be really helpful and healing for the support and supportive for the nervous system. So even just as simple of like, I mean, the example I just gave about 0.1% change, you could, if you're asking yourself the question, do I have a choice? Yes, you have the choice to make no change if you don't want to. Like maybe your nervous system wants to make 0% change. You have that choice and you have that autonomy to do that. And that could hit an autonomy need for you by giving yourself permission to not change. Your nervous system might be more accessible to change. And then there's relatedness. So, how safe do you feel with people? Can you connect with people? We're also dealing with this in the group. You're in this group with other people and reading their messages and their personal stories. So, that should help create connectedness and relatedness. And then fairness, is this reasonable? We all know what something feels like when it's not fair. Probably grew up saying that it's not fair, it's not fair. It doesn't feel fair when someone gets special treatment, for example, or there's no explanation for it. So, generally speaking, with yourself also being fair. And then status, am I okay here? Do I belong here? So, everyone in the group belongs even if some of you make big changes and some of you make no changes and some of you make small changes, everyone still belongs here. And all five of these things are at least being considered by me at most of the time. I too am not perfect, but for the most part, I do my best to. Sorry, someone's just coming in, distracted me. I do my best to consider at least all of these things when it comes to the nervous system lens, because I too have a nervous system. And when I move into a state of protection. I also don't see clearly and don't have capacity to use my prefrontal brain. So I'll teach you guys a few things throughout the month too of like physical practices, like breathing exercises and things that you can do that help with at
with
least,
at least
Shelby, mute yourself. Yeah, with at least help expanding your nervous system's capacity for handling a little bit of discomfort. So doubt and limitation show up when one of these things feels threatened in some way. Generally speaking, if you're like, okay, I got triggered by something today, if you were to scan these five things, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness, and status, it probably would hit one of those things. So we're creating a safe container. We're talking about certainty, what's happening this month, how it works. And when you join an Instagram group, you're like, what even is this? Like, is it just a group chat? Is there something else? Like, you'll probably maybe even notice that there was another Instagram account that I also made that was like talking in the chat last night. It was like a wizard. I know. So some of it is certain, and you're like, hey, I have an idea what's going on. And then there's also this whole other element of like wonder and magic and like unpredictability that I'm also playing with. But I'm trying to at least coordinate those things in amounts that would be optimal for people's learning. Like, I want to awaken curiosity, but not so much that you're thinking, what in the actual F is happening right now? But sometimes that's even useful. So when we're going with certainty, you can expect at least for the month that we'll be doing something every day in the chat and in the group. And then there'll be one brain talk per week and one recorded meditation that will be sent. And then lots of practices that you could participate in if you want to. You could just watch, you could listen, you can participate. There's a lot of opportunity and option that you have when participating in something like this. It's like kind of take it at your own pace. So don't feel like you have to be in every class live and listen to every minute of every meditation and read every post. It's really just meant for you to pick up what you need to pick up and take what you need from it. If you want to be high participation level, you absolutely can. If you want to be low participation, you can do that too. So that's the autonomy. You can mute, skip, or take your time. You don't have to be at everything or participate. Obviously, the more that you participate, the better. You're going to get more out of it for you personally. And then also, the other people in the group are also going to get more out of it because when you share, it gives them permission. So the more, the better. But if you're like shutting down about it, don't worry about it. Like, just don't worry about it. You can just watch. It can be like entertainment for you. And then relatedness, we're not doing it alone. So this is a group process. It does have different sort of approaches than one-on-one work because we're just working in a group. But I prefer working with in groups, and I think I'm just more comfortable doing it that way. So I'm experimenting with building an online group and seeing if there can be the same level of like camaraderie and connection that would happen in person. So this is why this is the container that we're building in this process. And so the bread and butter of this whole thing and what we're doing this month is the neurosculpting process. So neurosculpting, as you can see, has that little registered symbol next to it. This is a trademarked process. My friend Lisa Wimberger is the one that created it. She has an incredible story that I'll tell maybe in the next class. I'll give you like a brief. If you don't know about Lisa, her story goes back like quite a ways, but generally speaking, the summary of it was that when she was 15, she got struck by lightning at the base of her spine and since then had these like seizures. Like she created some sort of seizure disorder from, I think, obviously just the electrical currents that would have gone through her body on that day. I think it essentially just fried her nervous system. And so for a decade or so, she just would struggle with having these seizures where her heart would stop. She would eventually either be resuscitated or come back on her own. And it would just be debilitating. Like she would be embarrassed about it. Obviously, it would impact her childcare situation. Her daughter witnessed one. It was really traumatic. And in one of the last episodes that she basically had this like come to God moment where she was like, I don't want to go back, but I have a 3-year-old daughter, so I obviously have to. And she kind of like made a deal with the other side that's like, if I go back, I'm gonna find a way to make this stop happening to me. When I figure out a way to make it stop, I'm gonna marry it, basically, is what she said. So that is how neurosculpting was created. I love that about this modality because it has a lived, experienced element to it. It's not a theory of like, here, take this intellectual pattern process of here's how you do a neuroplastic thing. Like she actually did this to herself to make seizures stop and has worked with hundreds of people from like paraplegics and people with Alzheimer's to improve their quality of life. Like she had a paraplegic that had no movement in her hands, actually start moving her fingers. Like things, actual crazy things have happened because when neuroplasticity is possible and you know how it works and you can prime the body for it, then you can actually make huge changes in a short period of time or small changes in a short period of time. So the neurosculpting process is something that she created. This is like her bread and butter. She figured this out literally just feeling around in the dark and taking like online courses. She does have 2 degrees. I think one in, they're education related. She has an education degree, but she doesn't have like a PhD in neuroscience, for example, but she's writing her ninth book, very familiar on the topic. And not only is it registered and trademarked, they also have real scientific evidence that it works because she's been doing this modality now for 18, almost 19 years. And so it's been picked up by different schools. Like there was a dental school that used it that increased like their fine motor skills from performing cavities on students. Like there's just like crazy evidence out there that actually it does work. And so it's a 5-step process, super simple, but the 5 steps must be done in this order. And so the first step is to quiet the fight or flight response or the midbrain, which is regulating that stress response. So it's like, okay, fear alarm system is on. First, and or the first step to doing anything is to turn the alarm on the fear off. We do that in meditation by paying attention to what is predictable and reliable and consistent. The first thing I typically go for is breath and heartbeat because those are two very biological things that everyone has. No one can argue with you. You're not relying on anything external to yourself. Like when you get into being like, okay, well, what's predictable and reliable with my environment? You go like, okay, my house is warm. Okay, well, that actually is a little less predictable because it relies on you like having the house and the mortgage and the job, and not everyone can say that. So then we want to be able to meet everyone where they're at. And generally speaking, the more universal language that you can use to include everyone, the more inclusive you'll be in the way that you connect with all people around you. Because we wouldn't go up to someone who's like homeless on the street today, where it's like negative 19 degrees, and be like, oh, well, just look for something predictable in your environment. Yeah, well, you know what's predictable is how fucking cold it is. So when we're okay, but you could say to somebody, even in a distressed state, well, if you notice that your breath is breathing itself, or that your heart's still beating in your chest, like for most people, unless they're like hooked up to a machine in a hospital, that's true for them. Even in your deepest states of sleep, you're still breathing. So that's how we typically quiet that fear response is by looking for things that you can't argue with. They're super predictable and super reliable. Second step is to engage the prefrontal cortex. This happens naturally when you turn the alarm system of fear off. You naturally just become curious of what comes next. But I like to think of step 2 as like tickling or flirting with the prefrontal cortex. That's what I get into my most creative imaging. And sometimes there's an element of humor and novelty to it. We'll definitely experiment with that in the meditation tomorrow. Usually, one of the most powerful visuals I can give in the studio is using Ivy because everyone knows that she's like a fluffy little golden doodle. And I'll do that whole visualization of her in a sumo suit, wearing stilts, walking around with a cowboy hat on. Like, I just create this cute, humorous, funny little image that makes people chuckle. And once I start to hear chuckling around the room, that's when I know, okay, we've got some prefrontal engagement because we wouldn't be laughing if we were in a state of fear. So it can happen super quick. I'm talking like minutes. You could go from being in a fear state to being like, okay, well, my breath's breathing itself, my heart's beating all on its own. And wait, what is Ivy now in a sumo suit on stilts? Like, how did that happen? So that's step 1 and 2. The first 2 steps are priming you for neuroplastic change. So they're what we call a neurosculpting induction. They also use the word induction and hypnosis, but I will say that neurosculpting and hypnosis are very different. The one single thing that makes them very different is that hypnosis typically has command language, which is the person facilitating would be telling you you are more relaxed. And so you can think of this kind of like how you would give affirmations to your nervous system. If you say like you are successful, you are loved, like your nervous system could reject that just simply by the fact that it's command language. Most people are fine with it, but again, in extreme states when someone's like, "No, you don't understand." I'm not, then typically speaking, command language is going to trigger some nervous systems. But neurosculpting has something called invitational language. It's very open-ended, it's very curious. So you could start talking to yourself in that way and using the invitational language with yourself and being like, well, I wonder what it would be like if I did make 1% change today. Or I wonder what it would be like if I did turn my alarm system off. Or I wonder what it would be like if I could notice that my breath is breathing itself. Instead of being like, notice that your breath is breathing itself. You're like, well, I wonder what would happen if I did. And then being more curious and inviting about the way that you think about it can completely shift the way that your nervous system responds. So, step one and two are really effective for stress reduction all on their own. You don't even have to do all five steps. If I don't have a lot of time, that's what I'll do. I'll be like, okay, I'm just going to do this for the first two steps. It takes me 3 minutes, completely changes my whole day, and primes me to be open to things like change. So then the rest of the process, this is like how you make actual changes. In step three, we have engaging both hemispheres or bilateral stimulation. We do this in like physical practice a lot with cross-body movements. You do it when you walk. So like if you were to pair, I think neurosculpting with walking, that would be really powerful. But in the meditation or top-down approach to bilateral stimulation, we really just like use language that the right brain really likes. So when we're talking to the right hemisphere, it's very much like color and texture and taste and things that are creative. And then when we're talking to the left brain, we're talking to structure and lists and organization and spelling, things that are very like I think of a Virgo for some reason when I think of left hemisphere, just because it's very organized and structured. And then in the meditation, we just toggle between those two things. So I'll give some images that the right brain likes. And then now I'm talking to the left brain. And then I'm talking to the right brain again. And then I'm talking to the left brain. And when we engage both hemispheres like that back and forth, it creates this harmony and this connection where we can actually we're primed to make change from step one and two, and now we're getting into it. We're like, okay, both of my hemispheres are now online having a conversation. Now, what do I want to tell them now that they're listening? And so in step three, that's when we have the ability to make some sort of change. I have different themed meditations. One of them, some of you have definitely probably experienced it already, is the authorship experience where you're like, I am the author of my own story. I'm picturing this book of my life, and I have the power and the agency to go in and change certain details and make edits to the story. And so that's one approach of making an edit. And then there's also, you can sort of dissolve something. There's so many different ways that you can experiment with it. I think we had a meditation a couple weeks ago where we went into the control room and we were turning dials down for things like hormone functions and sleep regulation and immunity and digestion. So there's different ways that you can approach it, and we'll experiment with a few themes throughout the month in the meditation process. But in step three, that's where we start making change. And so even now, we're not meditating, doing a meditation process today, we're doing it tomorrow. But even now, you can start to think about, okay, well, if I were to start to make a change specifically, where would I start? And if you start thinking about that a day before you even get there, after knowing, okay, I need to turn my fear down and get curious about what change is like, you could be preconditioning yourself for this work. And then step four is to link a somatic cue. So this is when you anchor it into your physical body. We use the non-dominant hand to do this. And so if you write with your right hand, for example, you would use your left hand. And in the meditation, I would give you an invitation to do the hand gesture. And so that would be using your non-dominant hand, some sort of easily repeatable hand gesture. It could just be like tapping your fingers together, or I have one where I like reach across my body and swipe down my right arm. Another one where I have my hand on my chest, like something simple and really subtle that you can do in your daily life, that hand movement is then tied to or linked to the change or the edit that you made in step three. And so I like to think of it like pressing save on the moment or the memory of like, okay, now I made a new program. That's the path I want to follow from now on. Now I'm going to save it into the body. And then that hand gesture carries the frequency and the connection to the subconscious of that signal. So say later in the day, you make the hand gesture, you're signaling to your subconscious the edit that you made. And then step five is to give the experience a name. If you get to a save point in a game or you're saving a file on your computer, usually there's like a way to name it. Like, okay, I'm going to save it. This is the name of the file. This is the idea behind step five, which is a linguistic cue. It could be a symbol, a word, a song, a color, a name, like it could be a person's name, anything that can be associated with it, with the hand gesture and the edit that you made. And so that becomes like if you're looking at a file folder of all the things that you have made changes for, you're like, oh, okay, I remember on January 4th at 9 a.m. I did that class and it's called the chair on the floor, and that hand gesture is tied with chair on the floor. And so now every time I open up chair on the floor, I feel that hand gesture, and then I remember, my subconscious remembers that I actually made a change about the way that my nervous system responds to stress. Like I can actually handle 5% more stress now because I made that change. So this is the five-step process. I know it seems like a lot because I talked for like 5 minutes about each step, but the more you hear it and the more you see it played out, it actually is really simple. One, turn off the alarm. Two, get curious and quirky. Three, make some sort of change. And then four, a hand gesture. And then five, give it a name. And you can do that literally in a few minutes. The meditation process itself, when it's guided, takes about 15 to 17 minutes. It's super approachable. It's not like, okay, you need to sit in lotus for 60 minutes with your eyes closed and like levitate up off the floor. It's not that kind of meditation. It's a neuroplasticity meditation, so you can be relaxed, of course, and laying down to experience it, but it's also something you can do like while standing in the grocery store line or when you're in a meeting or even when you're in the middle of an argument with your partner and you're like, fuck, I want to like explode right now. And then you remember, oh my God, what if I do that hand gesture right now? And at least in a moment of stress, you have an anchor point in your body to be like, I remember the time that I made the change that I actually have 5% more capacity to handle stress. So I'm going to tap into that right now and use that. So that's the five-step process. And today we're really just going to focus on step one because you can't build a new story. Or today, this week, we're focusing on step one. We're going to go through all five steps in the meditation, but you can't build a new story from a nervous system that feels like the walls are burning down around you. And I've seen a lot of these memes of like Barbie with her house burning down behind her, and she's just like me in 2026, and it's her like just like brushing her hair while her house burns down behind her. But it's kind of that concept of like, okay, if your house is under fire, if you're under a major amount of threat, that's not the optimal time for your nervous system to making change. So the first step is to find safety. So we are entering this portal together, and on the first week, we were just kind of like getting permission to start. Okay, like you don't have to be perfect. Not everything is going to make sense in the first like 2 or 3 days of a 31-day process. It will come together over time. But the job this week is really just to participate and to give yourself permission to start the process of making change. So you can show up whenever you can. You can let your body experience it. You can let your brain maybe learn something different or experience something different. And then notice what happens when you stop forcing. So, what if you were given permission this week to be like, okay, we're gonna make change, but you don't have to force it. We're gonna start slow. We're not just like, okay, day one, now start sprinting at top speed. Like, what if for the first couple of days, we're just walking and getting to know each other and becoming more familiar with how the process works. So we can really just optimally set up the nervous system to accept the change that we might be suggesting to it. And so if limitation shows up this week, and it probably has for some of you already, I know there was a few comments in the chat that was like, well, what do I do if I don't even know like how to dream up something for myself? Like, what if I'm like too stuck or frozen to even find, I don't know, like a vision? Like some people are just stuck. So that's okay. Um, if you are Yeah, if your nervous system is really resistant to it and it's like, well, I'm trying to like open up my imagination and be like, what do I want? And it's black, that's okay. That's just as like information, a data point that's really important to note about yourself is like, okay, right now there's really nothing flowing. So step one, that's why we're starting with step one, is to first just dial down the fear response. And that's going to be at different levels for everybody at different times. But generally speaking, your nervous system is going to have a pretty consistent safety access that it's like that's normal for it. And so if you have a low capacity and you're like, I don't really dream a lot, I don't really think highly of myself, like I've got a lot of limits and doubts, like good things happen for other people and not for me, I'll never be like that, that's okay. We'll meet you there and we'll start with that. You don't have to be like off to the races, imagining $1 million. And I know some of the images are like big bags of coins and people being like, yeah, I'm gonna just like live on the beach with my cats. And it's easy for some people. And then for others, it's not. So wherever you're starting it, you have permission to start. It's okay. And and the permission also is to go through the whole month experience and still not make any change and that be okay. If that's your entry point to learning how it works, and then maybe you retake the group again in the future and your nervous system's like, okay, at least I know what the process is now. And before, my nervous system was like, I'm not ready for any change. I just want to audit the class and learn how it works. And then the second time I take it, now I'm like 5% open to making change. And so really just think of it like in increments like that. If you notice you're stuck, okay, what would it be like if 0.0000001% of you was open to making one tiny little change today? So no one's going to be left behind, but you could have limitations that show up this week. That's okay. We're going to work with them. That's the whole point of the group. So if anyone has them, if you feel comfortable and vulnerable enough to share what's coming up for you, please do, because that will give permission for other people to be like, okay, it's not just me. But if you could be thinking like I'm behind, maybe this is not going to work for me. I don't get it. Why is she making like little images with ChatGPT all the time? I don't like AI. I'm doing it wrong. All of those things can come up. Try to just stay curious and open and see if change is possible. So we're going to treat everything as a signal, not as a stop sign. If you get a signal that feels like a stop, you can be like, okay, I'm observing that my nervous system is in major resistance to that. So let's be curious about it. And you could say to yourself, like, oh, my brain is trying to protect me. That's okay. That's a good thing. You actually want to acknowledge that your nervous system is doing its job to keep you alive. And then also acknowledging that its job is to keep you alive, but it's not to respond and react as if you're under a death threat when you're not. But it's okay if you are. So step one is to get yourself out of this threat mode so that you can actually play the game. I use a lot of analogies for games because I think it's a good way of looking at it. In the next few slides, you'll see some of those images of like the map of the game, kind of like a Zelda map if you're walking around. It's an interesting way of looking at it because you can be like, okay, I'm just experiencing this like environment and I'm going to encounter different things along the way. And maybe I'll get like a new tool or an elixir or some sort of weapon or something to use. But if you're playing the game of life, that, as we remember from the beginning of the presentation, is a risk. Like to live, to go out into the world, to go into a relationship, to get married, to start a business, to all those things that people want, they're all risks because there's a risk it won't work out, it won't go the way that you want it to. And so, in order to exist in the world, we have to take those risks, which means that we can't avoid stress. We can't evade it in any way. But what we can do is expand our tolerance to be able to handle different situations and also have tools to quiet the alarm when it goes off. So, we're not forcing calm by giving the brain these predictable, reliable signals that can tell us, like right now in this moment, we're safe enough. And enough is a key word to use because you could say, like, oh, I feel safe today. That's a relative statement. But if you say, I feel safe enough, at least you're signaling, like, okay, well, there's at least enough safety here for me today that maybe I don't feel 100%, but I have enough. So when we get ourselves out of threat mode, we can actually play the game. And then what we focus on is what's stable and true. And so in step one, in meditation, it's usually the breath moving, the heartbeat pulsing, gravity holding you, the temperature of the room, the points of contact that your body have with the floor. These are all really simple ways of bringing threat mode down. If you think of it like a dial of volume, you take it from like a high blasting volume just by noticing a few biological things that are around you, turn the volume down. So that's why I say it's like really simple. It's not easy because that's hard to do when you're stressed out, but it is very simple. And then when you get yourself out of this stress mode, the brain starts to get enough green lights, like the survival circuits soften. So that part of you that's like always existing on survival and fight or flight, that softens a little bit, and then your thinking brain can come back online. So that's when you're accessing again your prefrontal cortex. So it's not really a spiritual process. It's truly biological in the way that this is the capacity that your brain has. This is how it works. When you are in a fear state, your limbic brain is on, midbrain is active. It's impossible to make change because your brain is like, no, I need to be on threat mode because I'm gonna die. And so how we create the conditions for neuroplasticity really does matter. Oh no, my little image didn't load. Did the other one? Oh, that's so sad. I'll post them in the group. I don't know why they didn't work, but I made these little images last night and now they're gone. That's sad. But it was an image of a little avatar playing a game on a map and it says load the save point. So when you're playing a game and you get to like, okay, I just beat a big boss or I beat a hard level, you want to save that shit so that when you go back, you don't have to do it again. So step one is like walking your avatar back to a save point or a safe zone before you try hard quest. You're like, okay, I'm just gonna check in, find homeostasis, balance. I used to play the Super Mario game on Super Nintendo when I was a kid, and there was that level that you could like unlock where you would go and it would just give you infinite mushrooms and feathers and Yoshis. That's where you want to go and like load up before you're gonna go on a quest, you know? You want to have your pockets full and your nervous system resourced. And then danger mode. So when you're in danger mode in a game, that's usually when the screen shakes and the music gets intense. If you think of like going to Bowser's Castle, it's like dun 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 dun. Danger mode. Your character gets sloppy, you button mash, and you make dumb choices and you can't strategize. That's an analogy for your nervous system in one of those fight, flight, or freeze modes. So step one is the activation. We pause, we regroup, and we return to the safe space. And in the body, that can feel like the safe zone is the predictable code of heart, breath, gravity, and sensation. And these are the things that the body can rely on even when the mind is spiraling. I like to just do breath and heartbeat because it's super simple and easy. Like everyone's breath is breathing and heart's pumping. So step one is not, I'm trying to unlock a new reality while my avatar has like one HP point. If you're shut down, collapsed at zero, that's not the optimal time to be like, I'm gonna completely change everything in my life. Step one then becomes about restoring stability so you can actually play the game. So we're gonna find a way for your nervous system to play that Super Mario level and just load up on Yoshis and mushrooms and feathers so that you can be ready for your quest to change. Oh, one of my images worked. Okay, so save point achieved. So we're not button mashing our life from one point. And here's the teaser for next week. Once the nervous system actually calms down, you start to notice the weird little default settings that you've been living inside, like these little programs, these automations that you're like, wait a minute. And so our second brain talk is basically like, okay, this is my pattern, this is my loop, and I can actually change it. And now I know how. So we're going to be really gentle about the approach, but we're going to break the spell. So here's the little wizard with me at the game point saying, game saved, ready for what's next. And then look, it says like vagus nerve ventral thriving. And I'm like, I'm in the green. I could probably use a few more like mushrooms and feathers, but just to give you an idea of like a visual of how you actually charge yourself up. And you do that through things like breath work and co-regulation and all the things that your nervous system responds to. So that's it for today, folks. I didn't think I was going to talk for a full hour, but as usual, I always do. So thank you for coming. Wow, there's so many of you. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, and Robin's here, so that's 10 people left. I think that's my biggest class so far. So thanks for coming. Tomorrow we have the neurosculpting meditation coming. It's not going to be a live one like I was doing them live for the last couple of months, but it's going to be recorded, so you'll get that sent to you in the chat. Thank you guys so much. Lover you. Thank you. Toddler pooped in the shower. BRB. Oh, that is prefrontal for me. I like that. That's a cool image. Of poop in the shower. Did that really happen? Anyways, that's a beautiful place to end it today. 10 o'clock on the dot. Whoever's coming to prom massage in the studio, you better get down here. Okay. I'll send the recording or post the recording for this. So if you want to watch it again, you absolutely can. Half the time she showers. Okay, well, having a toddler sounds like something I don't want to do. Okay, love you. Bye.